This is a podcast which does not shy away from difficult and vulnerable topics, and we ask you to take care of yourselves when you listen. The content is of an adult nature, and we do swear at times.
Welcome to the Autistic Licence podcast. I'm Leo in London.
I'm Shauna, and I'm Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland.
We invite you to listen in on our conversations as we experiment with unmasking in an autistic space. We talk about what it means to discover we're autistic as adults, especially with established careers as therapists. We want people to know that autistic therapists exist and to broaden the conversation about neurodiversity. You're so welcome to join us, whoever you are and wherever in the world you are. We hope you'll find something of interest and connection here. Hello, Dawn. I think you can hear us.
Yeah, I'm just going to put my video on now.
Okay. There
we go.
Hiya.
Hi.
Lovely to see you.
Good evening.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you for getting in touch with us and agreeing to do this. We are very much just going to have a conversation with you, Dawn, as if we've just met you anywhere. So we're not seeing it as an interview. It's very much a conversation, and then we'll all edit. We'll do some editing. We'll see what you think of it. Nothing's going to go out that you're not happy with.
Yes, that's important.
Yeah. That's okay, yeah. I've made a few notes just to jog my memory of different things. So
that's grand. We'll follow whatever. If that works for you and you want to start somewhere, we'll go with that. Or if it kind of feels like a tangent is, naturally coming up, then you'll probably not be able to stop us going down.
No.
But we'll see what happens.
Yeah. We'll see what happens, yeah.
Yeah.
How would you normally introduce yourself to somebody you didn't know?
I don't know. I don't like introductions. So I would probably just say I'm Dawn and I'm live in Rosendale, East Lancashire, with my 3 cats, my son, my husband, and an axolotl, which is like a water amphibian.
I know what an axolotl is.
Yeah.
I know.
Wow.
So that's probably what I would say. I don't tend to sort of talk about, a lot of people say, what do you do then? That really difficult questions sometimes. Because obviously I'm voluntary work at the moment. I'm not employed.
Okay.
I don't feel like I'm at the point where I'm ready to find employment. Then I always find that sort of bit difficult to sort of introduce myself with what do you do. So,
Yeah, it's really unfortunate question that people ask, isn't it? As if our worth is to do with what we do, and then we feel on the back foot if we don't have something to offer them. And you're really welcome here for who you are, Dawn. We're not looking at what you do. We want to know who you are. And I guess that part of what drew you to get in touch is maybe about your autistic identity, something that might have changed along the way in that sense. Is there anything in relation to that you would like to kick us off with?
Yeah, so I came across your podcast because I was basically going through researching, understanding what autism was for people. I was only diagnosed in August 23. And my kind of journey to that was from working with young people. And one of the young people that I used to work with as an employment and education mentor was someone who had very severe autism. And at the time, I did training with the National Autistic Society as part of my job. And I was sat there on the training and I was thinking, I'm actually ticking all these boxes. Of all these, what they call the diagnostic traits of what autism is. And I thought, maybe this is why I'm struggling so much in the workplace. And I'd struggled in the workplace in different types of jobs. especially around the social context of work.
Yeah.
And the expectations that you have to network, have relationships with colleagues, chit-chat, all these different things. And I was sat thinking, do you know, it's quite possible that I'm actually autistic, because I never felt when I was growing up that I actually fitted in.
Yes.
And I had lots of different things going on, because my mum was... my mum had very severe mental health problems. So that was in the background at the same time, but I was also growing up as an autistic person. And obviously the system then, people didn't get diagnosed with or any identification that girls were autistic. Wasn't picked up in the school. And then I started listening to the podcast channels when I got diagnosed and started researching it. Got quite a few books and just started looking into what other people were saying about autism, especially around the late diagnosis of autism, because there's more and more people now who may have been in the mental health system, which I had been, from having postnatal depression when my son was born. And like one thing led to another, and I'm just thinking they always felt something more than anxiety, and anxiety kind of downplayed how I experience the world. And it's hard to explain unless you're autistic or, you know, that's just my experience of how things are for me. And so
things were making you anxious that didn't seem to be a problem for other people.
Sorry, could you just say that again, please?
Was it that, like, there were things that were making you anxious or, you know, building anxiety inside that didn't seem to be a problem for other people?
Yeah, I mean, people were just saying that I was quite shy. I mean, Mum used to say she's quite shy and all the general kind of things that... And I just found it really difficult being around, keeping friendships. Making friends seemed to be okay. It was maintaining the friendships. It was a reoccurring issue. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, you want to...
No, that was...
all right.
I wasn't coming...
So just clarifying that. Yeah, I got the shy, quiet thing as well. Dawn, yeah. And probably around the same era as what you're talking about. And I think that that kind of reinforced itself, because I think that as girls, we also kind of realise that that'll get us the least attention. You know, we're not really being understood, and, you know, so we're not going to really act out in a way that maybe stereotypically boys might do, but then we get put in that box of quiet, shy, and that seems to be what people are content to label us as opposed to going behind that and what might be causing us to do that as a strategy, like as a defense against how alarming the world might actually be to us, which, as you've just said, looks like anxiety as well. And maybe anxiety as a secondary manifestation of autism. But yeah, it's the autism and that frame and that lens that wasn't seen for a very long time and still isn't seen for a lot of people. We're kind of, you know, we're kind of the ones that have been identified or have identified ourselves. There's still a lot of people within the mental health system that are undiagnosed and trying to view themselves through those lenses as if that's primary as opposed to secondary to their autism.
Yes. Yes, and I was always I always felt, I think different is not really the right word. I just always felt like I wasn't on the same wavelength as other people. And I didn't understand things like hierarchy in organisations. It's hard to explain. It's not like you don't respect people and you don't like people. You just, you have like a consequence of being around people in that you'd actually burn out.
Yes.
And it's almost like it's not, it never felt, what's the word, innate, natural to be sociable. You know, like when you see some people and you think, Gosh, yeah, they just kind of like fly through conversations and they mix in with people who know how to deal with people around them and stuff. But for me, I think I developed a way of like copying what other people did.
Okay. Yeah.
But I didn't know I was copying it until I started reading up about what autism is and what people do to survive, to cope in social situations. And I didn't even think it was a thing. I just thought, I'm okay one-to-one with people or two people, but I just burn out with too much social interaction, hence why I said earlier about struggling in the workplace.
Yes.
And the expectation that you're a human being, you're a woman, therefore you need to be able to do these, like what society requests you to be doing. And I always felt that I wasn't someone that was able to cope with those expectations. Which is why I ended up with diagnosis of depression, anxiety, still take medication. I'm really glad that I got the diagnosis when I did, but I'm also a little bit sad that my mum's still here, but she has dementia. I'm a little bit sad that my mum's not able to understand that I'm diagnosed now.
Yeah.
And that's the only one thing that I have difficult feelings about. That we've both kind of lost something, because she, obviously my mum doesn't know. She's my mum has dementia. She doesn't know. She knows who I am, but we would never have a conversation and be able to say, I was diagnosed with autism, Mum, but in some ways I'm glad as well, because there's people who've been diagnosed now later in life and they've not actually had the parents around to share that with, or be in the life still with. And some people probably think, I'm 48 now, what's the point of having a diagnosis? But it was more important for me because I was in the mental health system. And then I started to hear people saying, a lot of people with autism as a woman at this age ended up with a diagnosis of personality disorder. And I just started thinking, yeah, it makes complete sense. Then when you go through the menopause, everything just magnifies. Your anxiety, your mood, everything is more debilitating. It's
funny that Shauna and I were having a conversation about grief and loss, and Shauna particularly was highlighting that there's a version of grief. You'll be able to explain this better than me, Shauna, but there's a version of grief that isn't about something that you've lost. It's about something you didn't get to have, and that's not somehow as valid. That struck a chord for me when you were just describing that loss of not being able to share that with your mum, for example, or and this is another very common late diagnosis thing, that you weren't diagnosed at an earlier stage and have that understanding then. These are just things that you don't have. It's not a loss of a thing. It's an ongoing absence, and that's grief too. Yeah,
it is. It's like you can say depression, but you can also say, for me, it's more trauma, because life was quite traumatic in that not only was looking after a mum with quite severe mental health problems, I was also an autistic person growing up in a world that wasn't quite fitting with, and I always were like going against the grain of lots of things, and I was always challenging things, and I was always thinking, why are things the way they are? I don't gel with like the way things are set up in society. Why do I think like that? But everyone else seems to just kind of like accept it.
Just get it. Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely.
Environments, GP surgeries, places that you go into, buildings, the lighting, it's just, really intense.
And that's another thing, that to go back to what you were talking about earlier about the experience of sociability, that it's quite, I share very much of what you were saying. I think many people do, that it's lovely to be with a person, or maybe even kind of two or three, but after that it burns energy at a ridiculous rate. But it's often seen, that part of autism is that we don't like small talk. We're bad at forming relationships or maintaining relationships. And those are all real struggles. But also there's the sensory overload of that kind of sociability. So it's not just that I struggle with knowing when to speak in a big crowd of people or how to insert myself into a social situation. It's also that beyond that very small group of people that we might be more comfortable with, there's sensory overload and in the moment burnout from that too. And
yeah. And I found that as well with workplaces.
Mm-hmm.
My last 2 jobs were always in an open office, and it was like everybody was talking at the same level and all the sounds were competing for my attention at one time, and I was always wondering why I'm so exhausted. And it was more than exhaustion. It's hard to explain. Mm-hmm. It's not like tired as in tired. It's like your brain is trying to work out what to listen to first, and it just can't do it. It's hard to explain. You might understand, but
it's total overstimulation, isn't it? So many things firing at once and taking it all in, because and I think that there's a hyper empathy as well, that some of what that exhaustion is, not that you're even listening to every detail of every conversation, but your brain is picking it up, and then afterwards you realise that you've picked up things you didn't realise that you've picked up, and we hold them and we process them, and we just don't have the same kind of filters that non-autistic people seem to have in those environments, that they can just kind of tune in. We just take it all in, and then it takes another 6 hours before it's kind of processed through, just because there's so much of it. I worked in a couple of open offices, and I don't think I could do it anymore. I don't know how on earth I got through it. I think there was also a numbing that went on, that there was a part of me that knew how to numb and go into quite a dissociated state at times just to get through it and to overcome that overload, which is obviously an even more unhealthy way of managing it. But it's a trauma response, and that's what you were alluding to as well, Dawn. I don't know that there's very many untraumatized, late diagnosed autistic people. There may be, hypothetically, some untraumatized children, depending on their upbringing, at this point with more awareness and of neurodiversity, and maybe family systems that are more welcoming and affirming. But I don't think that we can escape the trauma of living in that neuronormative environment in our early days. It is going to be traumatic to our systems. It's just too much.
Yeah.
Too demanding.
Yeah, and I always think as well, when we mentioned about my mum not being able to have that conversation with your parents, say I've now been diagnosed with autism, and remember you said I was always really shy. Well, actually it's this, and not being able to have that conversation with her because of the dementia and everything else. It's makes you think then, because her mum was in the mental health system, it's quite likely that she was autistic as well, and that she's gone through the same. The history's repeated itself a little bit with me, but I've got to a point where I've been able to seek out a diagnosis. But my mum wouldn't have been able, perhaps if mum was diagnosed, because we share some of the same traits, and I started to identify things in me that maybe she suffers with, like sensory and that kind of thing. Yeah, it just makes me think, well, what would her life have been like? And it goes back to that cycle of loss again, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly.
That not only have you kind of not been diagnosed as a child, but your parent wasn't even diagnosed.
Yeah.
So that's a very complex relationship between a mother and a daughter then.
Really,
if that makes sense.
Does. You've really added to that idea that you experienced grief and loss because of what you haven't had, but then on your mother's behalf you carry that grief and loss about what she didn't have, and how that all gets passed down.
Yeah.
It's a sadness to carry.
Yeah. But this is been good for me, because I've been able to find a way of, this is my first conversation around speaking to people who understand and get how I might see the world as well.
That's so important as well. And it's so, you're so lucky if you get to do that. There's, thank goodness that at least we're in an age where we can find each other on social media and stuff. But, because that would have been impossible even 20 years ago. But it's, I've said many times that it's such an enormous privilege doing what I do that most of my conversations are with autistic people. And they're about understanding each other. That's the whole focus of it. It must be, I think it must be. I had over 50 years of not having that experience, actually. And that's, that's so isolating. Oh, by the way, sorry, just as a sidebar, you said you were diagnosed in August. Do you have a particular anniversary? Is there a date that you know?
I do. I have my autism diagnosis on the 23rd of August, 2023. So
mine is the 5th of August, 22.
So just a year before, really.
Yes, yeah. That's my autiversary.
Is that what they call it? Yeah.
No, I just made that up, but I'm sure other people have said it before.
It would be good to talk about autistic community, because I imagine there's lots of people listening who are still finding it hard to access autistic community. That's probably why some people listen to us. It's possibly something that, that we're offering a sense of that. And, although you say, Leo, that you talk to a lot of autistic people, it is in a particular context. It is in a therapeutic context, and it's not as mutual as friendship, community connections would be. And
I get that with you.
You get that with me. Yeah. And there is a sense in which we would hope to make more of that possible in some way. I suppose that's we've wondered about how that might happen, and it hasn't quite kind of flowed into being just yet. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that, Dawn. Has it been hard to find people? And what might we all do to try and make some of those bridges with each other? Because we're all, sometimes we give the impression that everybody's finding each other, but I don't think they are. I still think it's very hard. I still don't know people in my hometown. I know one person in my country of Northern Ireland, so it's not for me anywhere near where I want it to be from a community point of view.
Yeah, no, likewise. I mean, I've got a friend who I met through, started a Facebook page in 2011, which is around mental health awareness, which is still there. So we met through that, and then she's actually pursuing a diagnosis herself, and also possibly her children are neurodivergent as well.
Yeah.
So I've made connections with people who may not be diagnosed, or I've identified that there's some kind of connection there, and you make connections with people, but not necessarily knowing that they're diagnosed. But like you're saying, I've not really voluntarily seeked out groups, just for the nature of the fact that I don't want to be in groups with people per se, because I've not enjoyed being in groups with people per se. I've tried doing things like creating groups. I've worked in environments where I've been asked to be in groups, that kind of thing, and I've always found it a really uncomfortable thing. But I think as soon as I got diagnosed, I was obviously really keen to be connected through social media and go in all these different forums and chat to all these different people. But the thing that I really feel is to be in a room with people would be helpful. And I don't know, it's just been able to share, do you experience difficulty with eye contact? Do you feel the way I feel, that kind of thing? And that's nice to have that connection with people. But I think we're quite still far away of having, I don't know whether the right phrase is communities for people with autism, or whether people really get what it is. and how things could be different for people. Yeah, but I think it's almost like, things need to be adapted a lot more for autism, but it's like, well, where do you start? You'd have to like redesign everything, wouldn't you?
But we've said,
and who says that it's a disorder anyway? I mean, I don't agree with the word disorder, the medical sort of terminology around it. I think it's because we're not the majority.
That's all it is.
But what's happening now is there's more people getting diagnosed, and it's becoming more the majority. Yeah. So I've just gone off in a bit of a round the cycle with that one, but
no, you're grand. But there's something that you talked about, wonder what it'd be like to be in a room and just be mirrored, by somebody who just naturally you find out something about someone and you realise, oh, that's like me. It's that kind of same here thing that so many people who are not autistic get from the day they're born. It's like, oh, me too. Yes, I'm like that. And they see themselves reflected in the world around them. They don't have to copy because they just are. They see themselves, and that validates themselves. But I wonder if a point that you're also making is that so many of us have struggled in groups, and yet the natural first line of what to do about isolation is to form a group, isn't it? You said about you've tried to form a group, and we have talked about forming groups, and then we've come up against, what does that really look like for autistic people? How do you really do it? Because it's got to look very, very different, because autistic people are different. We don't naturally gravitate to groups, but what is it? And we don't necessarily all gravitate a lot of the time to speaking, so that also means, we don't want to really sit around and talk the whole time, or what else needs to be available, and, how do we manage our spoons on a given day, how do we plan in advance for something whenever we are autistic and we're seeking to look after ourselves and being autistic, and not masking and not pushing ourselves to do things. It's almost like a whole new paradigm, and that's what you say, where on earth do we start, even within autistic community, at getting really real with what we need, and not just following a template of, hey, you're isolated, form a group. That might not.
Perhaps it's more about, so a group is, especially if it's an organised one, then it's a place, even if that place may be online, but it's a time and a place. And maybe actually what it is, or what it needs to look like, is a place as in an actual space. And then it's not about we're all going to arrive at the same time, we're going to socialise, or we're going to do it might be just that co-regulatory presence of parallel play, body doubling, that, those kinds of concepts where we just get to be ourselves in a space and choose what we do with that. And that, if I think about that now, then it's not daunting that there might be 15 people there, because I can quite easily imagine 15 people in a space not talking or feeling that they have to achieve something socially, but just the presence. Of course, I'm going to go back to my experience of Autistic last year and Shauna's the year before, but that's what that was. And there was several hundred people there.
Wow.
There were no expectations. That's the thing I came back to at the time. I think that the really difficult thing for us are the expectations of what it means to be a person. And they really don't match up to our experiences. So to have a space where there aren't any expectations of how I should speak or behave or not, that would feel rather wonderful.
I'm just visualising something that you said there of, what if there was kind of an online space where people could log on while they read their book or play on their phone, or
24 hours a day could be,
or eat. Wow. And it was a kind of a trying to create that sense of you just, and people can talk, or they can write in the chat, or they cannot. but actually we would get used to each other's faces and ways of being and the background, and that actually might be enough for us for quite a while. Oh, there's this familiar person. It's a woman somewhere, and I see them often in the same chair sitting with their cat, and then I see that person over there, and often when they come on, they're reading a book, or this person seems to sit with a coffee cup, and actually we would really get to know each other if we allowed ourselves to be seen, because you'd have to allow yourself to be seen, obviously, but then also allowed that just to naturally. And if two people decided to chat, and it would be known that they would be chatting in front of the other people, of course, but that that the other people could choose to listen or put on noise cancelling headphones or whatever they chose to do. It could be very experimental to do something like that.
It brings me back to education, training, school environments, how there's so much performance required as in a social situation with all elements of the training and the education, and you have to stand up and do presentations, and it will get better, and it never got better for me. It never came with practice. It was just never gonna be something that I felt comfortable with, being in front of people. I've got loads of good things to say, but not stood in front of a room full of people. I've done it. It's just terrifying. I don't know why it is, but it is. But I can talk over a podcast or something, and quite happy to do that. It's just not within a room full of people.
Yes.
It's almost like you're kind of aware of yourself, and everything's it's like a second delay with everything. It's like you're aware of yourself, you're aware of the people that are in front of you, but then you've got to actually talk about and give information out and do your presentation at the same time. It's like, how do you do that? It's not even impossible, is it? And that's why I struggled with the expectations of education. And I was always a creative person. I was always someone that wanted to draw and do creative things, and I always thought outside the box and always saw the bigger picture with things. But the workplace and the environments that I was in, I always found that wasn't how the culture was there or how they worked. It was like, and like going back to what I said earlier about making friends at work and socialising, I wanted to go to work. Don't ask me what my weekend's been like. I just want to come in and do my job. I know it sounds really rude, but it's not rude. I just there for necessity, and my necessity is to do a job. I don't really want to know about or be asked about my weekend, and it sounds really strange to say it out loud, but that's just who I am.
Not to us.
And you used the word expectations a couple of times there. I'm more and more convinced that is what the major discomfort is, even though it's got lots of facets and different traumatic experiences attached to it. But it's the the expectation, what's expected of us, that just doesn't match up with what we're able to offer. And also, what was it that you would ADHD brain now, I can't remember where I was going with that. There was something about the workplace and small talk. No, it'll come back to me.
That's about your weekend. I was saying so what was your weekend like? And it was like, oh my gosh, it's painful this. Went to make a cup of tea in the kitchen. Someone's asking me a question. I like your shoes. I like this. And it's like, like... I know you're being nice, and that's what you do, but I really... But
it's not the same language. It is a different...
Not the same language, no.
And it is this... I've talked about Wittgenstein's lion before, which says that, if a lion could speak English, we wouldn't understand a word it said, because its experiences and its frame of reference is so radically different to ours. Nothing that it would think or describe makes sense. And I remembered what the other thing... Oh, no, it's gone again.
All right, we'll come back. It always does.
Write it down, you idiot.
Was it about the weekend? No, not the weekend.
It was. That did bring me back to it, though. Oh my goodness.
The other thing Dawn was talking about was about the thinking outside the box and the creativity and how it just, what it sounded to me was, it sounds like such a pity, you know, why that couldn't be brought out and welcomed. That's what I often think whenever I hear things like that. Like, there's always a place for that, and if a workplace doesn't have a place for that, then it's very out of balance. And I know lots of them don't, but you know, it's just a pity. It's just, you know, to think that wasn't plugged and you weren't allowed to, you weren't encouraged to show some of that. And you know, I think that's something maybe that in autistic spaces, those that do exist, maybe there's ways in which people enjoy showing things to each other. You know, it's like, you know, actually people might be doing their knitting during a training program or something like that, and you get that natural kind of, that's so many of us, not that some of us are not creative in a way that it's what we produce that's so beautiful or something, but that's not what it's about. It's about the process of using, and it's an embodied way of expressing and getting through the day, enjoying, getting a little bit more, getting through the day while we're doing whatever it is that we're doing.
That's part of what that space might be about as well, that parallel play thing.
Yeah.
Of
you naturally just
sitting in your different spaces, being creative, and it either interacts with other people or it doesn't. That does take me back to the point, and I did write it down this time, and it's not that big a deal. But when you were talking, Dawn, about that this is kind of okay, or there's lots that you want to say, but not in that immediacy of a lot of people, there is something that I hear so many autistic people talking about, that in certain contexts, it is so it's unbearable to be perceived. It's so often the word that we use. It's not about, it's similar to a not wanting to exist feeling, but it isn't that. It's about having any kind of ripple that affects anybody else can be intensely uncomfortable. And I guess that is to do with not meeting, again, expectations. If you're invisible, you were saying this the other night, Shauna, that, you know, if you're invisible, then you're not affecting anybody else, you're safe. But being perceived, it's not about even us perceiving the other people. There's such a discomfort often of them perceiving us because we're not going to be what they expect.
And only been able to read factual information. I'm always someone that likes to read factual information. I've always tried the books about, I don't know, made up stories. And I always get it confused between fiction and fiction and
non-fiction. Same.
Fiction, I've tried, and I've never been able to get my head around anything fiction. I can't read it. I read in the same page several times, and I'm thinking, I'm not getting into this at all. It's got to be factual information. There's got to be a purpose having a conversation with somebody. It can't just be like, you know, weather, small talk. I know we have to do it to get through things, but it's like, can we just get straight to the point in the meeting? Do we have to go through all this? And that's what my brain's thinking as it sat there listening to everybody else. Yeah, and the sensory side of things was another major sign that I struggled. I couldn't cope with background noise, light, sounds, smells not so much, but fabrics, clothes have got to be soft, that it doesn't feel like you're actually wearing the fabric, you know, and everything's just got to be like comfortable, familiar. You know, I'm not a person that likes to do fashion. I just do my own thing, you know. But yeah, I felt when I was growing up that I had to follow fashion and trends. But now it's like, no, it's not me, really.
Is there something, Dawn, something in, as you were growing up and as I was growing up, we learnt all this masking and this adaptation. It may not, it's not really us any more than it is anyone. But because we had to learn to do it, then it it makes it hard to see it in ourselves and for other people to see it in us. But actually, at bottom, at root, I'll say it for I wish that I could be more like just cut off that, and because it's a strategy and it's something that keeps me safe, that's why it's so hard to sort of unmask. It has to feel safe enough for that to happen naturally. I can't just choose to do it. But actually, that's why I will appear more autistic the more comfortable in myself I am, because I lose that. And some people, from a neurotypical point of view, might think that is, a lower way of functioning. And again, I don't like those labels, but that might be what that's seen as. But in actual fact, it's a more authentic representation of who I am. It's just that it's been covered over with all of that masking that's become, we become professional at it, and it's then takes a long time to unlearn it and feel okay in ourselves, that we just naturally go into a room and don't put that on, and it's not an attractive prospect to be judged more. But there's other parts of me that are kind of like, if I it will actually be a happier way of being if I can get to that in time.
Yeah, and it's like, well, what is unmasking and what is masking as well when you're diagnosed late? I'm not asking that. I'm not putting that question out there to be answered, but I'm thinking, what actually is it? Because you've done it all your life, so therefore, how do you undo it?
How do you undo it? Yeah.
And what is that? What does that look like if you're unmasking? I mean, what is it? You've developed ways of feeling safe and surviving, but how do you then go about and be your authentic self? What they say, your authentic self, or what is that? How do you grow into being your authentic self now at this stage in life? How do you find
the rest of our lives when we do, if we're lucky enough to recognize that? I mean, I do kind of have an answer about what masking is, but not obviously what you're talking about, which is taking apart what it is that I'm doing that actually isn't authentic, and that's exploration. But when it's conscious, then we can choose to do it sometimes. Sometimes it's worth the energy of putting on that front, blah, 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 because that's basically a social skill is what it becomes. But the important thing, I guess, for me is to create choice. And so if when we start to recognize which bits of our ways of being are masking, we can actually have them as they can turn into occasional tools. But this, again, probably coming back to that thing about community, that's, I think, when I will most often realize bits and pieces of me that, that's something I've learned to do, actually. That's masking, is by sharing conversations or presence or whatever with other autistic people. That, certain things, I never thought of that as autistic. Of course it is. Of course now that, and it'll be because somebody else has picked that up. I'm sure that when we listen back to this, there'll be things that, each of us have said that'll suddenly thought, I never thought of that. Yeah.
I suppose so you can see the similarities in other people. And then you actually know as well when you're with someone who's neurotypical, then when you don't gel, you know that there is difference there, but you can't actually quite label it either. Yes. And also I like to sit and just be quiet and have no expectation of having a conversation with somebody. That's nice with my friend. We can just be quiet, sit together but be quiet. What's wrong with silence? It's nice that you don't have to fill the gaps of silence with conversation.
Well, you do want a podcast, but apart from that.
Pardon?
You do on a podcast, you say?
The thing you said earlier, Dawn, about fiction and non-fiction, that was a moment for me. And I thought, that is probably an autistic thing.
No, it's not. I love fiction.
I know, but, well, you've met one autistic person, and I have enjoyed very, very specific forms of written fiction in the past. But I do think there's something about, what's the point of this? I need data, I need information, I need to learn something or resonate with something. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know. But that was one of those moments for me.
Well, but you watch TV, you watch things that take you into another world that don't have a point.
Totally. Exactly. So, this is one of the contradictions, though. Yeah. You know, it's like, like my cousin saying when I was diagnosed, how is it that you can't be in this room of 150 people talking and yet you can go to rock concerts and be deafened by noise for several hours? That doesn't make sense. It's the unrealistic expectation of consistency striking again, I think.
I wanted to say about the masking thing, because I had a thought there. I don't know. I really don't think that we have as much choice as sometimes you say, because I think so much of it is unconscious. But what I do think that helps is like being around other people who are like us, and then subconsciously give permission, so it's like if we're only around neurotypical people, and then we do that thing you were talking about at the beginning, Dawn, we might script things or practice things or copy things that they're going to do. But if we're around autistic people and they are normalizing movement in a certain way, or drawing while they're talking, not looking at us, doing whatever, going on their phones and not being offended if we go on ours, or then we get permission to do that, and then effectively we're unmasking because we're being invited into a space that allows us to be more ourselves. And then before we know it, we think that must be acceptable because that was another 3 people in that room. But we mightn't think that consciously, but just something gets transmitted to us. This must be okay because other people are doing it. But if we've never had that, then we have to be invited in and initiated in. We have to be around people who...
You're kind of describing what culture is.
Culture, really. Yeah.
And maybe that's also part of the answer of what is autistic community, is really getting to grips with what autistic culture is, where those shared touch points are that aren't masked. And it's like when we were having another conversation and we were talking about the queer community being quite a long way ahead in, developing their identity, not that there's no struggles, but, that their identity and acceptance. There are cultures within that. There are subcultures within those communities. And we don't have that so well defined yet.
Yeah.
What we have is a bunch of stereotypes, which we kind of have to fight against. But maybe that feels to me a really big part of what building that community would be.
Yes. And seeing it represented. Yeah. So I guess that's, in media, if there was actual, something depicted, this is autistic people hanging out, or, that then it would be like, oh, that really is okay to do that and behave that way. Yeah. What were you going to say, Dawn? I spoke over you there.
Oh, no, I was just thinking when you were talking then about, I always was one that would sit and doodle while I was in meetings and draw and do things because it helped me process what people were saying. Yeah. And just because I wasn't looking at them doesn't mean that I'm not listening. I found the eye contact whole thing quite uncomfortable.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that you're not listening. And if you didn't look and listen at school, that was seen as a no-no. Yeah.
That's right. It's something that as therapists, I think that I still have unlearning to do about, because of course you're taught as a therapist as well, you give eye contact and you encourage the eye contact. And I have no issue when I'm listening to somebody doing eye contact because I'm observing them and I'm observing all their whole way of being. But when I'm talking, I can't do it. Still can't do it. I'm not doing eye contact now. But even if sometimes online it looks like I am, I'm not. autist. And I think that it's something that's so ingrained on us, the teacher saying eyes front, eyes on me, as if that makes a difference, really. Like we don't, but it's painful. It is actually painful. I can't talk if I'm looking in somebody's eyes. It just, nothing comes out.
No, same.
Nothing comes out.
It's interesting. It's almost like, just going back to the topic of employment and things like that, I'd like to think that I'd be able to go back to work and have an income again and be able to do that, but be going into the workplace as an autistic person for the first time, and have some understand, because people say, well, you could ask for reasonable adjustments, and it's like, well, what does that actually look like, really, so, but yeah.
Do you know about access to work? Have you heard about access to work?
I've heard about that, yeah, because when I was in my old job, I'd gone through the process of access to work, but I didn't know I was autistic then.
Yes.
There was all the different things there about background noise, no difficulties concentrating. I find it really hard to multitask, which is probably partly ADHD and autism. Yeah, but I am aware of that. Yeah, the access to work.
It's something, this is hot off the press, but I applied previously, because you can get it as a self-employed person as well, because I really struggle with admin and, keeping on top of organising my diary and things like that. And I had applied for it about 18 months ago and they turned me down. And then I tried again. And I just heard last week that I will hopefully be receiving an offer letter this week. So I'll have to edit this out if it doesn't happen. But, it can be really like a long process to apply and sometimes reapply, as was my experience. And some people, seem to need to go through reviews and then get a different package agreed for them, but it does seem to be working. It seems to be being rolled out, and it didn't seem to be so accessible in Northern Ireland. It seemed to be maybe something that was actually more accessible in England, or more well known in England, and in certain sectors of employment it seems to be known, and it would probably depend on where you went, and in the therapy world it's taken a long time for the Department of Work and Pensions to sort of realise the kinds of things that we might need that are good for our field. But I guess I'm just saying that I've heard quite a few clients that I've had talking about it, and there are some other therapists within my network in England who have gone through it. So it's good to know, for you maybe that going back in right from the beginning, you can make sure that that's in place for yourself. And they will cover like equipment as well as your support needs, and whether you need an actual person to give you virtual or in-house assistance, whatever way they do that. But it's heartening to know that there is a scheme like that you don't just have to apply for a job and do it all yourself.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. I have tried in the past to aim for self-employment and things, but I've always fell down with the governance and the bookkeeping side of things. It's just almost impossible. My brain can't do things like that.
Yeah.
It's got all the ideas and then the structure and everything else, but it's the, like you're saying about the diary and the time management and the bookkeeping. It's just too much to actually.
Well, you wouldn't ask somebody with a visible disability to struggle against that, without assistance. And this is the same thing. You can't do that. There's an acceptance. It can be outsourced. It can be supported externally. Why should it be that you happen to be brilliant at coming up with X, Y, and Z, but crap at bookkeeping? Why should those two things be, skills that always go together? Of course not.
Yeah. Again, it goes back to like we said about expectations of things.
Exactly.
That you are you are able to just put time aside for these other tasks. But it's like in my brain, it doesn't work like that.
It just takes me twice as long to do them that it would someone else, and then that takes away from what I'm actually good at. So it doesn't make sense. And it's quite possibly similar for you and other people like us. And I think it makes sense, doesn't it, to, you know, do more of what you're good at, and let someone who's very good at some other things do some of those other things. Yeah.
I think we found our theme as well, just around expectations, the discomfort, you know, that causes.
And not being ashamed as well. I think that there's something there where for a lot of people they would think, well, if you can do these so-called high-level tasks, why can you not keep your diary? Why can you not answer your emails? Why can you not do that? They're like, well, you're clever or you're capable, and it just doesn't work like that. We're very spiky. There's things we could do very well, and there's things that just are well nigh impossible.
Yes. Yeah.
Are we wrapping up?
It's 8 o'clock.
How are you doing, Dawn? How are you feeling?
I was very good at timekeeping. That was very good.
I enjoyed having a conversation about it, and I'm hoping as time goes by, I will find myself in the workplace again, whatever that looks like. It's just been able to sit with somebody that can get it, because a lot of the people you meet who work in employment support type stuff, they don't have the neurodiversity lived experience necessarily, which is not like they're not good at the job, it's just they don't see it through the same lens. So, there's a bit of a niche there for I think employment support. That's right. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's nice to meet you both.
You too. Lovely, Dawn. Take good care. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Well, as you heard in our conversation there with Dawn, we did talk about the need for autistic spaces and what we might do about that. Well, we're currently exploring putting together some groups for autistic adults online. If you're interested in finding out more about that, then you can go to our website, autisticlicense.com/groups, and there you can click on the link to sign up for more information. And we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for listening to the Autistic License podcast. You can connect with us via Instagram, Facebook, YouTube at autisticlicense.com or by email at autisticlicense@gmail.com. We spell license LICENCE. We also have a Facebook community. You can search for Autistic License Shauna and Leo. Shauna spelled SIANA, or you can click on the link in the show notes.